Hi, this is Ali Moore. The following video, actually, it's a series of 4 videos that are between 10 to 15 minutes long each. Maybe one is a little bit longer than that. It's a recording of a conversation that I had with a friend of mine, Bill Treasurer. Bill is the founder and president of Giant Leap Consulting, and I am the founder and president of X Factor Solutions. We both do consulting work in leadership development, strategy, organizational change. This particular conversation that we had was a long time in the coming. It was about race, racial relations, and basically Bill had a number of questions that he had heard over the years. I've heard some of these similar questions, but they're questions that could be considered racist, at a minimum, microaggressive questions, questions that point to misperceptions, misunderstanding, delusions about what people think and feel about race. And so Bill, who is absolutely not a racist, and you'll hear more about that in the actual video. So Bill asks these questions of me to get my honest and open feedback. I didn't see these questions ahead of time, so these are my genuine and authentic answers. Some of them may be spot on for most of you. Some of them may be a little off. And so Bill and I both welcome your input. However, we just wanted to open up a dialogue about race, answer a few questions, and let the conversation go where it takes us. All right, so good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Ali.
Hey, so I'm going to give a quick introduction, then I'll also allow Bill to give a quick introduction. My name is Ali Moore. I am a 48-year-old African-American male who has lived in the United States my entire life. And I'm in the leadership development space. I also do some organizational change and strategy work. But the topic that we're talking about today is something that is near and dear to me because of life experiences, because of things that I've personally witnessed and things that I've been around my entire life. And that is racism, racial dialogue, the proper way to approach these situations, or I shouldn't say the proper way, my take on how to approach these situations, because I do understand that many people have different viewpoints. Many people have different life experiences. And so all of that textures the way that they interpret these types of things that we're going to be talking about today. We have a number of questions that Bill is going to ask me, and I'm going to answer those from my perspective, understanding that my perspective is not the only true answer. It's what I think in these situations. And so my attempt, or what I'm attempting to do today, is answer questions in a way that promotes positive dialogue, understanding, and also dispel some of the myths that people may have around the answers to these questions. All that will make sense once we get into it. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bill to get his take on what we're here to do today, some of his background and experiences that brought him to this point, and then we'll jump right in from there.
Well, thanks, Ali. My name's Bill Treasurer. I'm a 57-year-old white male who grew up in New York. I've got a company called Giant Leap Consulting. It's a courage building company. And certainly one of the ways of exercising courage is to entertain into uncomfortable dialogue. Ali and I have actually talked about doing this for years. There have been moments of racial strife in this country that, that never end, right? And they bubble up, and then there's these tense moments, and then we all sort of lull ourselves back into sleep, and then there's something else that comes up. In a couple of moments, Ali will share with you sort of what inspired us to do this, although we've been talking about it for at least 3 years. In fact, we had put these questions together over 3 years ago, and then something recently happened for both of us, and it was like, all right, we just got to do this. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity. As a little background for myself, I remember one time reading that Socrates said that a dog will bark at somebody it doesn't know, and it'll wag its tail at somebody it does know. Familiarity has a lot to do with, the dog's disposition relative to the person. But he saw it as the critical difference being ignorance, that what we're ignorant of, we'll bark at. And then once we become familiar with it, we don't bark at it. And my own experience has been a path in that direction. I have, I certainly have known racism. Certainly have been racist. I probably carry residual racism from my upbringing and such. But I had a life experience that was pretty transformative for me. I dated a girl and then was very involved in a relationship for 8.5 years with a white girl whose mom had remarried a black man when her mom had gotten divorced. And so it was an entirely interracial family that was either black or white or mulatto. And I dated her for 8.5 years, and I lived with her for 3 years. And I started out from, who I was going into that relationship, and I ended it by, having dinners with this multiracial family and watching football games together and having arguments together and holding hands and saying prayers around Thanksgiving together. And it was a transformative experience for me. It moved me from this place of barking at what I didn't understand, the Black experience, to wagging my tail. And so, I'm not some enlightened being by any means or any stretch of the imagination, but I want to do better, and I'm willing to do better. The other thing to know about Ali and I is we've known each other for about 25 years, and we've worked very closely together, and we've had hard conversations together. We've arguments together and such, but I love the guy and I trust the guy, and I'm looking forward to this dialogue.
Great, great. And so the incident that Bill was referring to was right at a week ago. The two of us were panelists on a 4-person panel discussion, a webinar entitled Leading After the Crisis. It had nothing to do with politics, race. It had everything to do with the response that leaders are going to be required to have after we come out of, or when we come out of this, the COVID-19 global pandemic. The meeting was being recorded. We had 60 plus participants on the call from all over the globe. But as soon as we started the meeting, some Zoom bombers jumped on. They had hacked through the login of a couple of our users and immediately started posting racist remarks in the chat room. They immediately started posting racist remarks across the presentation. They used the annotation mode of Zoom to post racist remarks across the actual presentation. And they even though we had them on mute, some type of way, they were able to start playing racist, misogynistic, damn right pornographic songs across our audio. And this all happened within the first 30 seconds of our meeting. And so I quickly paused the meeting. We actually stopped the meeting and logged everyone off and logged everyone back in so that we could kick out the people in the group who had joined. Unfortunately, it was a big shock. Not only did it disrupt the meeting, but for some of the people to see the words being used, the phrases that people were spewing forth. If you've never actually experienced it, it's a shocker to be, quite frankly, called a nigger, right, by someone who is joining your call, both typing it and in an audio. This is what was happening for the first minute of our call, for no other reason other than for them to add a racist shock value into what otherwise turned out to be a great discussion on leadership. And so when that happened, Bill and I talked about the need to go back and look at this that we had planned, like as Bill said, more than 3+ years ago, and say it's still needed. We know it's still needed, but now let's go ahead and just jump on and do this and see where it goes.
Yeah, I was totally shocked, and I spoke with Ali afterwards, and he said, "Well, you may be shocked because you don't have that experience, but for me, it's another Tuesday, right?" Like,
yeah.
So, but I'm glad we're able to do this. So, I'll jump into the questions. I will, just sort of let you know right off the back, they are, they are provocative questions. They are really racist questions, but they're questions that I have heard. Maybe at one time or another I even asked, and there's certainly questions that Ali has heard. So I'll just go ahead and get right into them.
And I'll reiterate a point as well, Bill, and that is my answers to these questions are my answers. I don't represent all African American, people of color, Black people's perspectives. I represent my own perspectives, which I'm assuming a lot of people will share, but there will also be people who will either disagree or might, at the worst case scenario, take offense with the way that I answer some of these questions. And that's a reality of there not being a singular answer to any of these.
Right. Yeah, Ali and I both know that we'll probably, take some blowback for doing this, but we'd rather enter it, try to be constructive than to avoid this stuff.
Yep.
And likewise, in my case, I'm going to be the carrier of these racist messages. So, but we feel that, we just need to get real about these kind of questions and get them out there. So my first question is, there was a Republican congressman from North Carolina from 2013 to 2019. His name was Robert Pittenger, and he literally said this. He said that Black people, quote, hate white people because white people are successful and they're not, unquote. Do Black people resent white people?
All right. So right off the bat with a doozy. Before I even answer that question, here's my take on whenever someone, whether they're an elected official or anyone else, says Black people this, and they phrase their question or their statement as if the Black population is this monolithic, singular thinking group of people. And I always ask them, whoever is posing the question, I ask them a question first, and that is, and I'll use you as an example, Bill. You are a proud New Yorker, but I know that you have worked and traveled all over the United States and all over the world. When you are in Texas, and I'm not picking on Texas, but when you're in Texas, you have a different experience and you experience different people than when you're in New York City. There's a different social norm. There's a different political sort of theories and philosophies. When you're in Southern California, it's different than Northern California. When you're in the Midwest, I know you did your grad school in Wisconsin. The mindset and how people approach everyday life there is different than, say, when you lived in Atlanta or now that you live in Asheville. And so often people give themselves, and white people in particular, give themselves the right and the ability to say, a New Yorker isn't like someone from Texas, isn't like someone from Southern California, isn't like someone from Northern California, isn't like someone from Asheville, North Carolina, isn't like someone from Miami. However, when they ask about Black people and the Black experience, they expect the answer to be the exact same, regardless of where that person is coming from. And so before I even answer the question about do Black people resent white people, I would say this: a Black person and Black people in the United States, although they share many of the same experiences and have experienced some of the same racism, the answer is going to be different depending on the socioeconomic status of that person. It's going to be different based on the geography of that person. Someone growing up in Wisconsin may have a completely different experience than someone growing up in Atlanta, Georgia. May be a completely different experience than someone growing up in Northern California. And so this whole notion of do Black people, and then whatever that question is, X, Y, Z, the answer is never going to be a singular answer. Okay. Now, with that being said, I will say this: there is resentment, and I harbor some of this, I have over the years. There is resentment for the way people of color, in particular, Black people in the United States, have been treated for decades and centuries. And so when someone says, do Black people hate white people? I would say, no, we don't hate white people, but we hate the idea that we were always treated as second-class citizens at the best, but at the worst, we were brought over as slaves, treated as such for 400 years, and then were started so far behind the rest of the citizens of the United States. Once slaves were emancipated, they still didn't have complete freedom. And this is not anything new. This is history that started hitting the table and shaking my screen already. This is history that started with slavery, obviously, and then through the Jim Crow laws and through segregation, and even to this day, when you look at redlining and all the rest of the things that are policies, they're no longer formal legal policies, but at one point they all were, but now they are still policies in people's heads and the way that they treat African Americans, that there is a resentment for the treatment. Now, just as we're talking and you're talking about, educating yourself to the Black experience, I think a lot of African Americans also, once they take the time to understand other people on an individual basis, they'll see, like the friendship that you and I have, I know you as a person. And so I don't look at you as a racist in any stretch of the imagination, but I see you as a white person who has become more enlightened to the plight and the situation that many African Americans are in this country. And so our relationship is based on us knowing each other individually. When you don't know someone individually, regardless of what color you are, you tend to have some overarching feelings that you may bring from other experiences, and you may lump everybody into that same experience. The other thing that I take, I take offense with that question is when someone says Black people hate white people because white people are successful and Black people aren't. I can count hundreds of colleagues, friends, people on a regular everyday basis of color who are wildly successful in everything they've done personally, professionally. They've had the same wife for 50 years. They make millions of dollars. I can also count hundreds of white people that I know, and people of all ethnicities, nationalities, and backgrounds who are not successful. And so when someone says white people are successful and Black people aren't, right off the bat, they're speaking from a place of ignorance, and they're speaking from what racists do is they take the absolute best example of someone within their own ethnicity and say, this is what we are. And they ignore everyone else, all the regular people, all the poor people, all the everyday Joes. They also look at other ethnicities and races, and they take the worst example of them and say, see, this is who they are. When the truth of the matter is there are highly successful people of every ethnicity, and there are people who are struggling of every ethnicity.
Good answer all the way around. I should say that Ali makes a mean breakfast. Like if you ever have Ali over, he's going to make the best breakfast you will ever have. So I'm going to extend this question because Pittenger's ignorance doesn't stop with one question. He went on to say that he went on to call North Carolina a welfare state and said, we have spent trillions of dollars on welfare, and we've put people in bondage so that they can't be capable of being. People on the right call this idea democratic plantationism. Many whites think that blacks are too eager to accept handouts and entitlements and are stuck in a quagmire of government dependency. Are blacks as a whole too dependent on government support?
So here's the reality of this country. There are more white people on government assistance and welfare than there are Black people. And that's just based on pure numbers and statistics. That's based on the number of white people there are in this country compared to the number of Black people that there are in this country. It is not a race, so welfare is not a race-based issue. It is a poverty issue. And so we have a poverty problem in this country, and our country being, a democracy, people have voted on what types of government subsidies, and the policies speak for themselves, that if you fall below the poverty line, our government will step in and help you. This is also true of corporations. So when everyone is talking about helping poor people, we also bail out corporations with low interest rate loans, if not just government subsidies, to keep them afloat because of the puzzle pieces that they play in the overall economy. The companies are too big to fail, the banks are too big to fail, and the impact that it may have on on the actual economy. So whenever and I'm clearly not an economist, but whenever we start talking about welfare and, and attaching it to any specific race group or an ethnicity, we need to talk about the totality of who receives money, who does not receive money. With that being said, and going back to the question, are Black people too eager to accept government handouts? I personally grew up with and know many people who were too proud to accept any type of handout from the government. And they said, that's okay. I pulled myself up to this point. I'll continue to move forward from this point. And so, I'm conflicted on this answer because there are people, there are children who are born into families who never had nothing, that for generations have been poverty stricken. And who am I to say that in a country where we have the money to help that child eat, help that child have clothes on that child's back, that we should deny that child the ability and opportunity to have that, while we're still giving money to corporations so that they won't fail. So I don't think Black people are too eager to accept handouts. I think we have a poverty issue in this country, and until we can solve that, it is, as a humanitarian, it's partly my responsibility to help other people if I have the ability to do so.